We often think of our historical local industry as being the manufacture of wool and cotton cloth goods, large mills with large chimneys employing all the local folk. We tend not to remember the other industries such as coal mining, quarrying and delving, along with pottery and brickmaking. Eccleshill has had a long tradition with brickmaking, going back to at least 1765 and maybe even further, but this started out more as a cottage industry with individual families being involved. In 1837, Manor Pottery was established by Lord of the Manor, Jeremiah Rawson. For the next 30 years, the pottery produced a salt-glazed brown stoneware, brown and creamy crockery, ornaments and statues, more notably ones of the then popular Duke of Wellington. Sometime around 1848, the site and mineral rights were acquired by William Woodhead, and the pottery continued to make high-quality salt-glazed wares until 1867. That's when Woodhead closed the pottery, had a Hoffman kiln constructed, and then production switched to the manufacture of bricks, sewer pipes and chimney pots. Surprisingly, today we know very little about the actual fabric of the business, and of course it's now passed beyond living memory, but we can still glean some information from old maps, auction records, and of course there are several accounts of the old Eccleshill board mentioned within Joseph King Hammond's book The History of Eccleshill 1083 to 1899. So let's start by seeing just where the old pottery and brickworks used to be. The old pottery shown here on this 1908 map of Eccleshill has been on Undercliff Road. Now today the area looks like this. And this triangular section showing the old field system is now occupied by the Eccleshill Library. Now if you recall, I mentioned the new owner, William Woodhead, had acquired the site and mineral rights. Well, those minerals being fireclay, which was used to make the pottery and bricks, was dug out from this clay pit or quarry. And today, having been infilled, the area now looks like this. I have to say, I thought it was a happy coincidence that major roadworks were taking place at the same time I were taking these photographs. I'll show you why in a moment. The fireclay which had been dug out of the pit was placed in tipper rail wagons, which was then pulled by a wire rope up to the pottery and through a tunnel which went under this crossroad. Part of the old pottery still exists today, which we can use to help us work out where the tunnel was. So the tunnel passes right under where the roadworks were being carried out. Now I could see there was quite a bit of interesting archaeology down there, but I'll leave you to study this photograph at your leisure. Following the death of William Woodhead, in the June of 1873, the trustees of his will had an itemised valuation of the pottery and brickworks drawn up. Now these items had a total valuation of £8,587, and they included a manor house which survives to this day, 11 cottages and stables, hay sheds, engine and pulling gear, a machine and drying sheds, boiler house, joiners and blacksmith shop, a reservoir, a Hoffman patent brick kiln and 2 other kilns, and of course a Bradley and Craven self-pressing brick machine. Now I came across this interesting piece of film from the 1930s of a pottery and brickworks in Clayton, Bradford, which bears a striking resemblance to how Manor Potteries would have operated back in its day. So let's watch and see what we can learn. Here we can see the clay tipper rail wagons being lowered down into the clay pit. Like Manor Pottery's clay pit, this is also an open cast pit. That means to say it's not an underground pit. And here we have a couple of lads with pick and shovel, hewing out the fire clay and then shoveling it into the carriages. Here the filmmakers have helped us by identifying the various layers of shale, coal and fire clay. And the coal would also be used as fuel for the kilns. Once filled, the carriages are then hoisted back up to the pottery. Where they're quickly tipped and emptied and then sent back down to pit. The rough fire clay now needs to be processed and refined. Here it's been crushed with large rollers and then ground into smaller pieces before being added to a large mixing vat where it's mixed with a little water and other ingredients that will help it bind when fired in the kiln. The refined clay is now ready to use and is scooped out of the vat and taken over to the hydraulic press and forming machine. And here's the hydraulic press, where an amount of clay is being pushed carefully into place. The operator down below activates the press and the clay is pushed down into the pipe former. The batch of pipes are then carted over to the next part of the process where they are scored and trimmed to the correct length. The scoring helps to form a good key when the finished pipes are coupled together and cemented in place. Here the pipe's collar is being cleaned and tidied, whilst the men are also spinning the pipes on a potter's wheel to ensure the pipes are straight and true. At this stage, the clay is known as being in a green state, so they are carefully stacked and allowed to dry out for several days before being taken into the kiln to fire. And this is how you make a 90-degree elbow pipe. Now think about it. How technically simple was that? One would expect this industry to use jigs and templars in order to ensure uniformity and the standardisation of their finished products. So let's watch as these are combined with the skills and wherewithal of the men. Now how simple did the lad make that look? Well, this next piece of film answers a question I put to an old colleague whilst dropping and capping an old chimney stack some 40 years ago. And this lad does this in his best bib and tucker whilst wearing a shirt and tie. First he has to build a huge block of clay, making sure it contains no pockets of air within it. Then, using two wood guide and gauge rods, he cuts the block into even layers using a wire cutter. Then he takes a quarter section of this layer of clay and begins to firm it into a mould, removing any excess clay as he goes. And he also uses water to help produce a smooth surface as he continues to push the clay into the mould's crevices. But this is only half of this part of the mould, and when both are joined together, they form the lower section of a chimney pot. And as more sections are moulded and produced, the chimney pot grows ever taller until it finally gets its crown. And that was my question over 40 years ago as I'm man-hauling one of these large chimney pots from off a chimney stack. I wonder how they made these things. Now I know. After several days of drying, the clay has now turned to the consistency of a hard biscuit, and it's now ready to be carefully stacked into the kiln to be fired. Each piece has to be placed and spaced so that every part of it can be heated and eventually coated in the salt glaze finish. Any mistakes here at this stage of the process could mean the total loss of several days' work in a bad firing. The kiln is then sealed with brick and clay and then fired. The firing may take several days, but the kiln will be constantly monitored, fed with coal fuel, and a constant high temperature maintained. At various stages, common salt will be added to the kiln. Sodium from the salt reacts with the silica in the clay to form a glassy coating of sodium silicate. Now this glaze may be coloured various shades of brown by using iron oxide, or blue by using cobalt oxide, or purple from manganese oxide. The kiln will then be allowed to gradually cool, which may also take several days before the brick and clay seal is demolished and the fired glazed pottery is now ready to be delivered to the customer. The old pottery finally met its end with the felling of the pottery's kiln chimney on the 12th of November 1921. You know, there's still many exciting and interesting things to be discovered about Manor Potteries for yourself. I've just scratched the surface in this video. There may well be a lost and forgotten coal mine in the area, and there's something very special about Terracotta Row. Oh, and what about Eccleshill Manor? So much more to discover and learn from. Well, I'll catch you later.